September 12th in 2009. We're in Chicago, Illinois, right at the beginning of the Page Society Fall Conference. I'm sitting with Peter Debreceny, and I think we'd like to start talking probably about your early career, and let's talk about its development. Following your graduation from college and through your current work as a consultant for Gig and McDonald. How did you land here? You began with a degree in political science and public administration. Tell us how you got here.
Okay, well, my first job out of college, or even while I was still in college actually, I was working for the equivalent of the New Zealand State Department, so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in New Zealand, which is where I'm from, and I was helping overseas students who'd come to the country under scholarships from Asia and Africa with their adjustment to the society, with their academic training. I was their case officer, if you like, while they were in the country. So, and it was a great job, and I met a lot of really interesting people from different parts of the world. But pretty quickly, a job became available in the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation, which at the time was the only radio and television broadcaster in the country. And it was at the height of the Vietnam War, or actually early, I guess, in the Vietnam War. There was a lot of protest. A friend of mine who worked for broadcasting had organized a conference. The government, which owned the broadcasting system at the time, wasn't very happy about the fact he'd done this because they were in favor of the war, he was opposed. So he lost his job, and he said, "Why don't you apply for my job?" So I was one of the applicants, and I was lucky enough to get the job. So I moved from being a Foreign Affairs, a State Department equivalent officer to being a broadcast journalist. And I did radio and television, first radio, then television current affairs. A program a bit like All Things Considered in the afternoons. We did a half-hour show every evening, which was live show on usually the political topics and economic topics of the day, both in New Zealand and around the world. And we would interview people. So Marvin Kalb, who was a really well-known CBS reporter at the time, was our person in the US, and we would call him in the evening and our time and get his sense of what was going on in the US, for example, people like that. And then in television, a program like 60 Minutes, but again, live current affairs program that was on 3 times a week, where I was one of the on-air talent doing film stories and in studio interviews. And so I did that for a while, and then I decided to move into PR, which is like a lot of folks in my generation. You were a journalist one day and you were a PR person the next. So one day I went from receiving press releases, and the next day I was writing them and sending them out. So I started an agency in New Zealand. I went to work for a client eventually. While I was at that firm, I was running marketing and public relations for this particular building company. Spent a couple of years in the US early in my career in Ohio as the US representative of the company around the export of its technology to the United States. Then went back to an advertising agency in New Zealand, where I ran the public relations division inside an advertising agency. So I got a very early taste of what integrated communication was all about. We had a very, even today would be regarded as a very modern approach, in terms of no matter what the business issue that the client or prospective client had, we would approach it from an integrated, holistic communications point of view. Again, went to work for a client, this time a very prominent New Zealand investment bank. Spent some time, we ended up sponsoring several New Zealand America's Cup challenges, so I spent some time in Australia, involved with the total marketing and sponsorship around the first New Zealand America's Cup challenge, and then in the US in San Diego for the second challenge, so as well as running the marketing around the financial part of what the bank was doing, also the sporting part. It was our money that everybody was using, so we thought we'd run it as well. Stayed on in the US as a consultant. So I've lived in lots of different parts of the country. Got headhunted back to New Zealand to run an agency, then to Australia for Edelman, and Edelman brought me to Chicago. And when I was at Edelman Chicago, I was hired by Allstate as Vice President of Corporate Relations at Allstate, and I was there for 9 years, retired a couple of years ago. And since then, after a little bit of an interregnum, started doing some consulting work with Merrill, McDonald, and bit by bit have got busier and busier, and now I'm back full-time being a consultant with Gage McDonald. So a pretty checkered career. I think the great thing when I look back about my career is I've had the opportunity to be involved in this profession in different countries, New Zealand, Australia, and here in the US. Half of it has been inside corporate environments and half inside agency environments. And I've had the good fortune, particularly because I started in New Zealand really early in the profession's history in that country. So you don't specialize, or you didn't then, and still not so much, because it's a very small market. So I got to do everything: sports sponsorship, art sponsorship, fast-moving consumer goods, mergers and acquisitions, investor relations, annual reports, corporate communications, writing. Like I used to take the press releases down to the paper in the middle of the night, so that actually hand it to the reporter and then walk down to get the story linotyped. So I feel really pleased that I've been able to get that very eclectic mix of what this business is about, because what you learn in one part of it, I think you can really apply it to the different parts of it. And my sense is in the US maybe we specialize too quickly. You come out of school, you maybe get a year under your belt in an agency, sometimes even just as an intern, and then suddenly now I'm in healthcare, and I'm going to be in healthcare forever. I think it's too quick.
Well, during those early years, did you have a mentor or anyone who really influenced your life or your career?
I've had several people in my career who have been great in terms of understanding where the organization that they were involved with was going and laying out a vision that people could get really engaged in. So I think one of the things that we do is we concentrate a lot on the facts and the objectives and the cold side of the business, if you like, and we miss the emotional side. And really what gets people excited and gets them to buy in is what is the vision? What is the unbelievably amazing thing that together we could do? And I've had several people in my career that were really good at that and that I learned from a lot. In my first job in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, my boss there in that particular part of it, he was a visionary. The first company that I went to work for after I started my agency, I went because the owner of the company had a unbelievable idea and was committed to make it happen, and was able to get people enthused and excited about it, and brought together an amazing collection of skills that created something out of nothing. And in my investment banking career, Michael Fay and David Richwhite, who were the individuals who owned the company, Michael in particular, could take an idea, really make it come alive, and talk about it in a way that everybody, you could get, and ultimately, in our case around the America's Cup, the country could get excited, enthused, and believe that something was possible and actually make it possible. So yes, I think that's right. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is a gift that we can bring to the companies that we work for or consult to is often management doesn't really know or describe clearly where they are going, what the strategy is. Sometimes that's because what companies do today is do what they did yesterday but do it a little bit better. Often senior management doesn't really know, where do I want to be 5 years from now? That's really different from where I am today. And for those companies who do know that, it's often wrapped up in a very esoteric, hard to understand strategy document that a McKinsey or a Bain has put together that really has no relevance to the person at the front of the, at the coalface, if you like. So two things that we can do. We can force, through the power of what we bring and the value that we add, we can force companies to know where B is. If we're at A now, where is B? Where are we going? And then we can explain that journey to everybody inside the organization and all stakeholder groups, the customers and the suppliers and the regulators and the investors, why we're on this journey from A to B and what it really means to them in very tangible terms that resonate emotionally as well as intellectually. And that's something that really only we can do, because only public relations people work across all stakeholder groups. Everybody else in the organization or consulting with the organization is in one little piece of it. We cover the whole thing.
That's right. The Gulf Coast experienced a terrible tragedy from the hurricanes Katrina and Rita. At that time, you were Allstate's vice president for corporate relations, and you manned the front line. Of course, there were many accusations in the following years about the integrity of the good hands of Allstate. And you found yourself dealing with the question of the flood versus the wind damage and over 300,000 claims. How did you, as an individual and as a corporation, handle extreme devastation and high emotions with little or no technology to support the normal communication that you would have with your employees and your various constituencies? How did you manage that?
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Well, it might be. So let me break the question down into some individual parts. Firstly, let's talk about crisis management, right? I think the really important, the one most important thing about crisis management is to understand that a crisis is not normal operations. A crisis is different, and everybody in the organization has to behave on the basis that a crisis is different, and what you would normally do on a day-to-day basis, you have to put to one side and focus on the crisis. Because if you don't stay ahead of the crisis, it's going to overtake you. That was particularly the case with Katrina and Rita. And any time a calamity, a catastrophe like that happens, but in any organization, a crisis can happen anytime and come from anywhere. And your organization has to be ready to deal with it. It's really critical. And when it happens, you need to be able to put your game plan into operation and really focus on dealing with that crisis and staying ahead of the game. Just to repeat, if you don't stay ahead of it, it's going to stay ahead of you, and then you're going to be following it, and it's going to be taking you to places you don't really want to go to. The only way to manage a crisis, to get it to where you want it to be, is to really focus, keep everything really simple, clear, and do everything that you need to do in order to be able to stay ahead of the game. Insurance companies are really good, big insurance companies like Allstate and State Farm, are really good at dealing with what we would call a catastrophe. So in the Allstate case, we have a whole group of people who do nothing else but look after catastrophes when they happen. Anytime there's a tornado, an earthquake, a hurricane, even something like an ice storm which will take power out and destroy cars, or a flood, we have the specialized group that will go in to look after our customers first. So we've had lots of experience at dealing with catastrophes, both from a point of view of running an insurance business, claims, handling claims, and communications. And so to an extent, when Katrina came along, we pretty much had a game plan that we knew was tried and tested, that we were ready to put into operation. Indeed, before Katrina arrived on shore, we had 30 mobile claims facilities, standing by, waiting. It was a little unclear exactly which way, where it was going to come. Was it going to come in through New Orleans, or was it going to veer a little bit to the east? So we were waiting, ready to bring this facility in, and the local region had communications all ready to go. Katrina was really interesting because it was so much different from virtually any other catastrophe of the kind. And to your point about early on, true, communications went completely out. An interesting learning for me was it just shows you the fragility of our communication system, right? All the cell phone towers go because the wind blows them down. And if the wind doesn't blow them down, there are so many people trying to get out on their cell phones, you can't get a line. So there are there's no wireless communication. And there probably wouldn't be in an earthquake as well. Next time the earthquake hits California, a big one, there won't be any wireless because all the towers are going to crumble. The regular landlines were fine for the first 24, 48, 72 hours. There was no power, but they all have backup generators, so they all moved to backup generators. But pretty quickly, after about the third or fourth day, those generators ran out of gas, and there was no way to get extra gas to them. So essentially, in that area, there was no communication happening. So our claims trucks, once we could actually get them in, which was really difficult, particularly with the security issues, were okay because they have their own facilities. But just to get our agents back up and running, we went and found a mobile telephone exchange and trucked it in, and we set it up in order to get people back up and running. But we have these systems already set up for when any hurricane comes through. We have these mobile claims officers come in, set up, and away we go, looking after customers. That's our number one priority. How do we first priority is how do we look after employees and agents, then how do we look after customers? And everybody's pretty much focused on that and nothing else but that for the first few weeks in the case of Katrina. And the role that communications plays is getting information to people. This is where you go to file your claim. Here are the locations. Here's what you could do. We use the news media to communicate to customers so that we can do what we're required to do and what we want to do in looking after our customers. And everybody in the Allstate family and in other insurance companies like Allstate, it's full of people who by their very nature are caring people. That's why you go work for an insurance company in most cases. You know, you're that way inclined. We are good neighbors if you work for State Farm, or we are, you know, that you're in good hands means something to the Allstate family. So that's we're focused on that. After a while, the communication system came back up, and the role of communications began to change because, to your point, we handled a lot of claims. And the insurance industry handled a lot of claims and paid out billions and billions of dollars. There was a very small percentage of all of those claims that became problematic. And it's an interesting conundrum for people like an insurance company where essentially you're bound by a legal document. Although we don't think of it this way, the policy that you have is a legal document between you and the insurance company, and the insurance company is bound by its requirement to deliver against that legal contract. And in the case of an insurance company like an Allstate or a State Farm, most of the other big insurance companies, Chubb, people like that, we will bend over backwards to meet the terms of the contract. But sometimes you do get into a disagreement about is what just happened covered under this contract or not? And that certainly did happen in the case of a relatively small number of homeowners in the region. And it's a really complicated, it is something covered, you know, under a normal homeowner's policy, you're not covered for water damage from the sort of event like a Katrina. You are covered if a tree falls down, breaks your roof, and rain gets in, you're covered. But if there's a flood, unless you've bought a special flood insurance policy from the government, you're not covered. And there was absolutely some debate, a lot of debate about that. Typically, not unusually, there's a lot of news coverage about the people who have the disagreement with the insurance company, and not much news coverage about the hundreds of thousands of people who've been very happy with the way that their claim was settled. And it is complicated trying to explain the legalities of an insurance contract when people's homes have disappeared, right? And they have, the emotional consequences are very real, and insurance companies really sympathize. But unfortunately, they are bound by the legal contract, and so it becomes an issue. How do you deal with that? I think you have to be persistent, and you have to try and explain in terms that really make sense for the average individual what's at stake and why things happen the way they do. And some of these you're going to lose, I guess, and some of them you're going to win. At the end of the day, what we know is we'll be judged by how well our agents and our claims folks relate to the customers over time. And Allstate does a fabulous job with that, fabulous job.
So Peter, what's the value of new media and social networking for employees? Why should corporations and CEOs encourage employees to engage in this activity?
It would be great to see CEOs who do encourage employees to engage in this activity. I don't think enough CEOs understand it, and not enough encourage their employees to engage. But let me just step back a little bit. I think there is definitely a change happening in how companies and their workforce interact with each other. So who is an employee anymore? Again, I'm going to use Allstate as an example. We have agents that, if you're an Allstate customer, that you deal with, who are independent business people in their own right, so they're not employees, but they represent Allstate. Those agents have their own employees. Again, they wear an Allstate badge, they have an Allstate t-shirt. As far as you're concerned, they're what's the difference between them and somebody who's really an employee? When you pick up the phone and you call an 800 number, you might get to a call center in the US, and it might have Allstate employees there, real employees, or it might have contract employees who work for some other company but are acting on behalf of Allstate. And as far as you're concerned, that's Allstate. But the call center may be in the Philippines or in India, and you're still dealing from your point of view with Allstate. So when you think about the organization and the folks who make the delivery of its strategy possible, that's just not just it always just used to be employees, I think, for most companies. Now it's not employees anymore. The whole workforce, the nature of the workforce has changed considerably. So that means that for a company, how you communicate with all of those people and how you get them all to understand your mission and your vision and how they might participate in it and what's in it for them, that also has to change, right? And particularly if there's no direct line of reporting relationship, then you can't mandate. It can't be command and control, even if you thought that command and control was a good idea, which I don't. So that's, I think, a really big change that's happened in the last few years. There are other big changes. The changing of the demographic profile of most companies' workforces is dramatic. As us baby boomers are beginning to roll off the scene, and Gen X's and Gen Y's come in to replace us, now you have way different expectations. A Gen Xer has a completely different expectation than a baby boomer does about how they're going to relate to the organization that they're going to work for, whether it's as an employee or a contractor or in whatever capacity. And they have expectations that they're very definite about. And if those expectations aren't met, they're going to go somewhere else. So the old post-World War II command and control structure inside organizations, I think is changing very rapidly, or if it's not, it has to. Organizations have to make the changes because they're going to lose their competitive edge otherwise. So what's replacing command and control? Well, dialogue is replacing command and control. It's not just top-down anymore. It's top-down and bottom-up, and ideally across as well. And social media is a wonderful enabler of that strategic change which has to happen. Other things are as well. How managers relate to their teams can't just be command and control if you really want to maximize the potential of the workforce. So I think you have to see social media in a broader context. It gives us lots of wonderful toys to play with, but there has to be a reason to play with the toys. And the reason, I think, inside the employee workforce environment inside a company is because it enables a different style of management. It's a style of management where there's much more involvement and participation at all levels of the organization, where leading can come from anywhere inside that team. Anybody can have a voice and make a contribution. And you're expected to. You can't just wait now until be told what to do. People want you to put your hand up and say, we should be doing this, and then to lead that opportunity. So social media is a great tool to enable that to happen. The only caveat that I would throw into that, though, I think and I've thought a lot about this, and at Gagan McDonald, we do a lot in this area. You can't impose inside a culture something that the culture is going to spit out. So the introduction of social media can be a great leader of culture change inside an organization, but you can't impose something that is so radically different from the existing culture that that culture spits it out. That won't work. In fact, that's a dangerous thing, because then all the potential power of the social media inside the organization, it gets lost forever. People say, well, we tried that and it didn't work, and it wasn't us, so we're never going to do it again. So we don't think that you can have a revolution inside your internal communication system just through introducing social media. It's got to be an evolution which is staged and appropriate to the existing culture, but is a leader of culture change and a leader of employee engagement.
Okay. Move that into the Page Society,
Right.
instead of the workforce, but the Page Society and the Page Turner. So how do you see that working within the society and the, how many, 350, 500, how many?
Almost 400 members.
Almost 400
Mhm.
members. Yeah, how's that working?
Well, let's come back a step. Like 2 years ago, the Society published the paper on the authentic enterprise.
Right.
And one of the things that it talked about, that paper talked about, was the change that was sweeping the world around the empowerment of dialogue through new technological tools. And that has profound implications for the profession. In part to practice what we preach, even though we're not necessarily the demographic that's most comfortable with social media tools, we started a blog. And many of our members now, increasing number of members, are very active in their own blogs and their own Facebook pages and Twitter streams and so on. So it's an opportunity inside the society for members to engage in dialogue about what's happening in the world, in the profession, and aspects that are important from a thought leadership point of view. The sorts of subjects that have been covered under the authentic enterprise, globalization, and then ethics most recently, a paper that a vigorous and vibrant conversation around ethics in the inside business and inside the profession. So has it been, I think in reality, we would liked to have seen a more rapid pickup and conversation happening, but it's definitely evolving and growing, and so that's a great thing.
Are there ethical challenges that corporations are experiencing with all the new portable web-ready devices? Have you come across, have you experienced any challenges, ethical challenges?
I don't think that social media tools by themselves, or Web 2.0, create additional ethical challenges by themselves. They certainly throw into sharp relief, though, the ethical challenges that organizations have, because nothing is secret anymore.
Right.
So in my view, organizations should be doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And this is a really interesting debate, right? It's been going back for thousands of years, and Socrates had lots of interesting things to say about this sort of stuff. But even if you're an organization now, even if you don't want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, you should be doing. It's smart to do the right thing because you're going to be found out if you don't. And so I think that Web 2.0 certainly exposes ethical lapses more quickly and more completely than previously was the case. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue. But there are lots of ethical challenges, and many for our profession, which we prefer not to talk about.
So the United States is experiencing a crisis of trust in business. And we've touched on this a little bit in a variety of different ways, but how do you, with everything that you've said, how in the world are corporations really going to handle the challenge? And are we starting to turn the corner yet, or do we have a long way to go?
Oh, I think we have a long way to go to rebuild trust in business, not just in the United States, but globally. The decline in trust has been ongoing. We've seen it spike a little bit in the last year or so with the financial meltdown, the recession, depression, if you like. It's high on people's radar screen right now, but if you look at the trends, for example, on the Edelman Trust Report, generally speaking, there's been a continuous decline in trust in business over the last many decades. So what needs to change? What needs to happen to change that? Well, in part, it's business needs to change. Business needs to earn trust. You don't get it conferred on you by right, and you don't get it conferred on you because you take out an ad. You get it conferred on you because you earn it. And you earn it every minute of every day with everybody that you relate to, starting with your employees. Right now, employees are the most important driver of trust in an organization because they're the people that are believed in and listened to by everybody, every other stakeholder group, way more often and with much more credibility than the CEO and senior management. So start with employees. Are you delivering on your promise to employees? And are you treating them with respect and dignity? And are you listening to what they say and adjusting accordingly? Or are you deaf and in command and control mode, in which case you'll never earn back your trust? Because if that's how you treat employees, who are your most important stakeholder group, how are you going to treat your customers and your suppliers? So I think it comes back to how do companies behave. There's an increasing power imbalance, and what we know from the work that was done with the Business Roundtable Institute of Ethics and the Arthur W. Page Society, and the report that recently came out, evening out that imbalance of power is a really important driver of trust, and that's going to come from how businesses behave and how they deliver on their commitments to society generally and individual stakeholder groups in particular. So once a company starts to think of itself as having a long-term future in a sustainable way, then it begins to behave with all stakeholder groups differently. Marks and Spencer in the UK is a really good example, I think, of a company that says there is no plan B. We have to be sustainable. And that means we have to change the relationship that we have with customers and suppliers and every other aspect of the environment in which we operate in order to build a long-term future. So in part, as companies, I think, begin to think that way and not be driven all the time just by the quarterly result, important though that is, and all of this is like what we must drive business outcomes as communicators, we've got to drive business outcomes, not just communication outcomes. The communications really don't matter if they're not driving some sort of business outcome, but we've got to help our companies see things differently and then behave differently, and then we'll help rebuild the trust.
Jack O'Dwyer wrote an article on Peter Sussman's disapproval of what he claims is the cozy relationship between the press and Page Society in the PR seminar. Does the public relations industry foster inappropriate relationships with members of the media?
Well, I think Jack O'Dwyer has a very cozy relationship with many of us in the PR industry, and we all respect and like that relationship. He's one of the industry's characters, and every industry needs some characters like Jack O'Dwyer. He's always a good person to have a drink with at a function. No, I don't think that the industry fosters an inappropriate relationship with the media at all. And in fact, the relationship with the media now is incredibly professional. It used to be, I guess, that PR people used to be able to wine and dine reporters and maybe influence what they wrote about or who they covered. Those days are pretty much gone. You can't buy a reporter a cup of coffee anymore. So what are reporters interested in their relationship with a public relations professional? I think they're interested in a lot of things. Firstly, reporters have way too much to do, and they're way too underpaid, and right now they're in an industry that has no clear sense of its future. So they're in an incredibly difficult position. And the more that we can help them with that, the more that we can make their life easier, the better. Second, we absolutely have to be truthful and honest in our dealings with the media, individually and collectively. So the relationship with a specific journalist is you have to give them a point of view. They're interested in the point of view of you or the company that you work for or represent. And you have to give them that point of view in an honest and truthful way. But that's what they're after. Nothing untoward about that.
For which of your accomplishments are you most proud of, and why?
Well, I guess the accomplishment that I was most proud of when I was involved with the first New Zealand America's Cup Challenge. That we created a movement that essentially swept the country, that the country got completely wrapped up in, that mattered to everybody. And we didn't win. It was our first challenge. We shouldn't have been anywhere near being able to win, but we were really close, really close. And we could have won, and probably just purely on skills should have won, but we didn't. We lost, and we lost with grace and with dignity. And we lost in a way that the country truly respected what the team of sportsmen had done, but that it had brought together a nation in a way that hadn't happened for a long time and was important at the time. So we made a big difference. We had an idea of making the impossible happen, and we came within that distance of making it happen, and we took the country with us the whole way. Through the audacity of the challenge, through the innovation of the response to the challenge, and through the commitment and exertion of a group of amazing sports people, through the support of the country's government and so individual politicians and collectively the government and many of the country's top companies, but also through the power of communications, which was able to make all of that visible to the average New Zealander every day, month after month after month, and as we were in Fremantle from October through February through the challenge.
Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about that I haven't covered or you haven't covered? And this will be on our website. There'll be future generations who may take a listen and a look-see and say,
Sure.
you know.
So this is the most amazing time to be starting off in this profession right now. This profession is in a state of complete revolution, and we don't really see where the revolution is going to take us. But if you think about some of the themes in the authentic enterprise, globalization, new stakeholder groups being empowered in ways that they never have before, the impact of technology, 1 billion cell phones sold a year, still in today's climate, most of them now with cameras, and now increasingly video cameras and data links. So each year there's 1 billion new publishers, television stations being created, and radio stations and newspapers being created. So the impact on what we do, it's clear that we are no longer in control, if we ever were, of the message. I don't think we ever were, but we like to think we were. Not anymore. So there's this revolution happening where we are even more important than we've ever been in terms of the contribution that the profession can make to society and to the businesses and organizations that we serve or work for. And there's a whole new world of the profession just waiting to be built. And if you're starting in the profession today, because all the ground rules have gone, and the environment in which we've been operating since Arthur Page's time is shifting underneath our feet. And so we can create a new vision of the profession and a new way that we work and a new ability to deliver value. And the people coming into the profession now are the people who are going to do that. Right? So us old fogies, our day has gone. It's the revolution that's happening now that the new people can come into. And the interesting thing about it is, if you look at the principles, the Arthur Page principles, which the society, the founders, many of whom are very much associated with the center, that they codified 26 years ago when the organization began, the sayings of Arthur Page into the Page principles. So they're ideas that he had that are 60 years old, or longer, 80 years old, right? They're more valid and more true and more relevant today than they ever were. And if you think about what's happening in this unknown, uncharted territory that we're all in, but if you look at the Page principles and if you follow the Page principles, you've got a guiding compass to go by. They're really powerful and really relevant. And I'm just fascinated by the way that these ideas that he had back then, every day and every week and every year, get more powerful and more relevant than before.
Wow, very good.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.